Okay, good morning everyone. How are you doing today? Good, good. I'm Tracy Durr, once again from the EEO office, Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, and EEO Compliance and Operations Division. We're here to talk a little bit about EEO laws, and we're also here to talk about the Notification and Federal Employee Anti-Discrimination and Retaliation Act. Whew, big long word. Just remember, no fear Act. Okay, let's give a little bit of an overview. First today we're going to talk a little bit about the employment discrimination and the laws that are associated with that. Also, we're going to talk a little bit about reasonable accommodation, what that is and what that means for you as an employee of HHS. We're also going to talk a little bit about whistleblower laws. There are a couple of different kinds of whistleblower laws. We're going to speak specifically to the kind that talk about employment discrimination and retaliation for filing an EEO complaint. And finally, we're going to talk a little bit about where to file a complaint if you have an issue with your employment at HHS, which I'm sure at this point you're not going to have, but we want to give you that information just in case. Okay, the first thing we're going to talk about is discrimination. Everyone knows what discrimination is. If you go to the cafeteria line and you choose the apple over the orange, you have just discriminated. Now, is that illegal discrimination? No, it's not illegal discrimination. Illegal discrimination comes when an employee is treated differently than another employee and they feel that that treatment is based on their protected status or their basis. The claim of employment discrimination is just that, the action plus a basis. In other words, what happened to you? You were denied training, you were disciplined, you didn't receive an assignment, you were not allowed to travel. And why do you feel that that action was taken? Was it because of your color, your sexual orientation, possibly your religion, or your disability? There are a variety of prohibited discrimination bases. You've seen many of these: race, color, religion, sex, national origin, disability, and age. We also have several other protected status orientation areas. We're going to talk a little bit about sexual orientation. Genetic information is also protected under the laws, EEO, as well as parental status. Now here's an overview of the basic anti-discrimination laws that you'll find in most every agency or even in private industry as well. Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, the Age Discrimination Act, the Rehab Act, or the Americans with Disabilities Act. They're two different things. They talk a little bit about different things, but essentially they kind of coordinate with each other. And the Equal Pay Act of 1963. So again, Title VII of the 1964 Civil Rights Act is the big one. Employment discrimination is prohibited on the basis of race, color, religion, sex, national origin, or reprisal, or what we call retaliation. Again, the Age Discrimination Act, it's of 1967, so it's a little bit more recent than some of the others. If you are a person 40 years or older, you cannot be discriminated against on the basis of your age. Again, the Rehabilitation Act of 1973 also dovetails with the Americans with Disabilities Act. Talks a little bit about the fact that those individuals that are federal agencies or their federal contractors cannot discriminate on the basis of disability or reasonable accommodation. Again, the ADA is what you're most familiar with, things like ramps or handicapped parking spaces or those kinds of things. That's where the Americans with Disabilities Act comes into play. And finally, the Equal Pay Act of 1963. Again, it's shortened and sweet. Equal pay for equal work. Now we're going to talk a little bit about what reasonable accommodation is. Reasonable accommodation occurs in two different places in the EEO laws. The first place is under the Americans with Disabilities Act or the Rehab Act of 1973. And that talks about your workplace location can be accommodated for a disability that you may have. The agency has an obligation to provide those to you, as long as you can still meet the minimum requirements of your job. In other words, if you are a qualified person with a disability, an agency must accommodate you to make sure that you can perform the essential functions of your job. Now, the other aspect of accommodation is not in terms of a disability, but in terms of a religious accommodation. If you have an activity that occurs based on your religion during the time that you are scheduled to do some sort of work-related item, the agency has a requirement to try to accommodate you in terms of making sure that you can get that activity in and you can also complete your work as well. A little bit about the whistleblower laws. There are two different kinds that we're going to talk about today. The first kind I'm going to mention, common ones that you've heard about, the fraud, waste, and abuse whistleblower. And then we also have the workplace issues with discrimination. The workplace issues with discrimination is the one that we're going to concentrate on. If you have mismanagement, waste of funds, those kinds of things, there is an organization that you will report those to, and I'll give you the information at the end. Now, the No Fear Act, which I had mentioned earlier, is our EEO, employment discrimination whistleblower package, if you will. It was signed in May of 2002, and it's specifically for federal agencies and those who employ federal workers. The general provisions of the Act talk about agencies will not retaliate for court judgments or settlements by reducing employees' compensation or through RIFs or any other activity that will adversely affect employees. They also have to make sure that managers have training and that they have a dynamic program for workplace dispute resolution. There are three cornerstones to the No Fear Act. First is notification, which is kind of what we're doing here today. Agencies must train and notify their employees of the rights and protections under the Anti-Discrimination and whistleblower laws. Accountability. Agencies must reimburse the Treasury Judgment Fund for payments made in district court cases. Now that money is coming out of the agencies, so they're paying a lot more attention to what's happening in their agencies, in their offices. And finally, agencies are posting information on their websites relating to complaints of discrimination, and they have to report to Congress. They've got to report two things to Congress. They've got to report all of their activity, plus they have to report how many people they have trained that year and how many people have received information about the No Fear Act. And as a matter of fact, for any federal agency, you can go on their website and that information should be posted as well. Okay, tying it all together. EEO laws protect you from illegal discrimination. It is illegal to discriminate on the basis of all of those protected statuses that I had given you earlier in the federal government. If you have a whistleblower complaint that is not related to employment, in other words, the traditional fraud, waste, and abuse, you're going to report those to the Office of Special Counsel. And if you have an issue with employment discrimination, you're going to contact our office. And make sure that you contact our office within 45 calendar days of the alleged incident, because there are time constraints and requirements in terms of reporting those events to us. Again, here's the address of the Office of Special Counsel if you have issues with fraud, waste, and abuse in other areas besides employment. And if you are a manager or a supervisor, you must provide an environment free of retaliation and free of discrimination. If you are an employee, you are required to make sure that you understand the Secretary's EEO and non-discrimination policies, because there are rights and responsibilities that you have as well. You need to be familiar with those. And there is training that is also required. The No Fear component has a training component. Once every 2 years after this, you will be required to take a self-study course online to certify that you have reviewed these components and these requirements. Where you can find some information about reasonable accommodation, the EEOC website has a lot of information about No Fear. A lot of information about EEO in general you'll find there as well. If you have any questions at all that you think may relate to EEO, please give us a call, come down and visit us. We are not only do we process complaints, but we also do what's called technical assistance, where we will give offices information about what constitutes discrimination and what doesn't. So you can always get your questions answered at any time. Thank you.